I'm Roger Sylvester-Bradley. I'm Head of Crop Performance with ADAS, and I want to explain why we've set up the Yield Enhancement Network, or YEN for short, and what the Yield Enhancement Network can do for its members. So the first thing about yield is it is crucial to profit. The higher your yields, the higher your profit. There's a poor relationship with inputs and profit. But the second thing is that we have a yield plateau at the moment in the UK and around the world. Yields have not been increasing since 1990. We predict we need yields 50% higher in not very long in the future. In about 2030 we'll be needing yields on average in the UK, compared with the current level of about between 7.5 and 8.5 tonnes per hectare. We're going to need something like 11 tonnes per hectare. So that's a big rate of increase that we need to achieve. So the Yield Enhancement Network is trying to address this urgent need to change the rate of yield increase. And we're going to try and do it by working with the leading farmers who are producing the highest yield. And the world record wheat yield has been achieved by an Englishman who farms in the south of South Island in New Zealand. In 2010 he produced 15.7 tonnes per hectare of Einstein. If we look at how he did that, we do it in terms of the amount of light and the amount of water and the amount of nutrients, because these are the resources that drive high yields. If we look at his weather, first of all, the amount of solar energy that his crops received were 50 terajoules per hectare. Now that compares with something like 35 terajoules that we receive in the UK in an average full year. His summer rainfall was really quite high. 660 millimetres is a lot of rainfall compared with the 300 or 400 that we might receive on average in the UK. And he provided a lot of nutrients, so he provided a lot of nitrogen for that crop. So that crop had a lot of resources. And if we work out what we think the potential of that particular environment was, in fact it's much bigger than 15.7 tonnes per hectare. It's 25.7 tonnes per hectare. So Mike only achieved 61% of his potential, which is about the same proportion of potential that the best farmers are achieving in the UK at the moment. So what we want to try and do is work out how to fill that gap, that 40% missing yield. What's it due to? So to do that, what we need to do is to look at how we explain the current levels of yield, and I'm going to describe now a crop that's described in the HGCA's Wheat Growth Guide, which yielded 11 tonnes per hectare, and then go on to see how we can change what the current crops are doing in order to achieve something like 20 tonnes per hectare. So if we look in the Wheat Growth Guide, we see a trajectory of solar radiation that amounts to something like 35 terajoules per hectare, but heavily distributed, of course, to the summer. And we grow our crops to intercept as much of that light as possible, but in fact, if we work out the proportion of the annual solar radiation that our best crops now intercept, it's something like a half, a bit less than half, in fact, for this 11-tonne crop. And then that is converted by photosynthesis at something like 1.2 tonnes per terajoule, which gives us a total growth of crop of something like 18 tonnes per hectare at the top of the green line. And that crop needs something of the order of 300 millimetres of water, because current crops grow their 18 tonnes. They need about 20 millimetres of water per tonne per hectare. So the current crops convert that dry matter, or the proportion of that dry matter that is in the grain is about half, 51%, which gives us our 11 tonnes per hectare. Now what I want to do is to refer to the best science that we have, and which is described in this book, The Yields of Farm Species, where we've worked out what the potential might be in relation to what we've just seen. So if we take the 47% of solar radiation that's captured by our current crops, we've looked to see how we might increase that, and we think 60% should be possible by getting earlier canopy expansion in the spring and by delaying senescence towards harvest time. Just by that change from 47 to 60% capture of solar radiation, we increase the, and by improving the conversion of photosynthesis to sort of the top end of the range that we see, 1.4 tons per terajoule of radiation, we get a yield, a total biomass yield of 27 tons per hectare. And then we think it should be possible to convert 60% of that to dry matter, so have 60% of the total biomass in grain, which gives us a yield of something like 20 tons per hectare, 19 or 20 tons per hectare. So you can see from the way we explain yield what the factors we need to think about are to get us off this yield plateau. So to summarise, we've now got some things to measure which will help us appreciate how we're falling short of the targets. We have resources to measure, light, water and nutrients. We have a means of capturing them with canopies and roots, and then we have to convert them. So if we take each of those in turn, the resources are solar energy, water and nutrients. The amounts of solar energy incident in the UK for a whole year vary between something like 30 and 40 terajoules per hectare. And if you don't know what a terajoule is, the Hiroshima bomb was 63 terajoules per hectare. So basically we receive on each hectare of land in a year half an Hiroshima bomb, which doesn't do as much damage because it's distributed across a hectare and across a whole year, but it's a lot of energy. So there's a lot of potential out there. Water we calculate as the total of summer rainfall plus the water that the soil can hold at the beginning of spring. So when the soil's filled up, it contains something between 150 and 250 or even more millimetres of water, and to that we add the summer rainfall, and that gives us our total supply of water for the crop. And it's these two things, the solar energy and the water, that we need to understand how much there is, how much to capture, and how they're going to be converted if we're going to explain and think about how to increase yields. Nutrients we really have total control over, so we don't need to think so hard about what we're achieving in that in relation to nutrients. So the targets for capture are 60% of capture of annual light energy, 75% capture of the water that's in the soil to 2 meters deep. So that's thinking about the canopy and the root system. These are the crucial things that farmers need to think about. And more important than the conversion that I'm going to come to now, and how to make how to do that is a matter of thinking of the whole breadth of husbandry. So it's a combination of when you sow, what your rotation is, what the machinery you've got available are. If you're going to delay senescence, you're probably going to have to delay harvest, which means you need to gear yourself up to harvest more efficiently. It's to do with your chemistry. Maybe you need not only to think about crop protection, but thinking about products that might encourage leaves to last for longer. And you, of course, need to choose the right genetics. And it's a combination of those things that we think will give us this 60% interception and our 75% capture of soil water. If we now turn to conversion, it's less easy to control this as a farmer except through the choice of species and varieties. But the targets are 1.4 tonnes per terajoule of energy and 18 millimetres of water used for each tonne. The harvest index target is 60%, compared with what we're generally achieving at the moment, which is 50, sometimes 55%. So not a huge increase, but what we need to do is to understand our varieties in these terms. So in the future, what we hope to be able to do is to compare what varieties are achieving in relation to these conversion targets. So this is what we're trying to introduce, this understanding of light and water is what we're trying to introduce with the Yield Enhancement Network. The Yield Enhancement Network is sponsored by a lot of companies, and we're very grateful to all of them. Well, it's sponsored by a lot of organisations, both industrial, commercial organisations and research organisations, and we're very grateful to them all for that. The purpose of the Yield Enhancement Network is not just to find winners, but to find people who are actually doing something different to what people are doing at the moment, and thereby achieving high yields. So we want to find the arable innovators and support what they're doing. We've done this by setting up a competition, which we've run now in 2013 and 2014. Competition is open to anyone, and we think anyone can win. It's not just the people with the best land who can win, because as well as the prize for the highest yield, we have a prize for the highest percent of potential yield. And in fact, in 2013, the person who won the latter prize actually produced the lowest yield, as I'll show you. So if we look at what happened in 2013, this is a map of the yield potential. So actually you can see that the higher yield potentials are on the west of the country, even though we grow most of our cereals on the east of the country. The higher potentials, which are the darker colours in green and blue, are on the west of the country. And our competitors, a few of them were on the west, but most were on the east and up into Scotland. And what I want to do is to just show you how we add information to what the competitors are doing. Of course, they tell us what their yields are, but we look at their crops more closely and see how they've produced the yields they've produced, so that we end up with a better understanding of yield potential. This is a photograph of the winning crop, which yielded 13.4 tonnes per hectare, crop of cordial grown in the siltland just near the Wash, sown on the 30th of September. But what we're really interested in is relating that winning yield to all the other yields to see what special that crop was doing. First of all, if we look at the conventional yield components, the ears per square metre, the grains per ear and the grain number per square metre, these things didn't explain a large proportion of the variation in yield. If we then look at 1,000 grain weight, harvest index and grain nitrogen, none of those things either explained a lot of the yield. What really explained the yield was the total amount of biomass that the crop grew. So the winning entry produced the most biomass, as you can see on this graph. So there's a strong relationship between the biomass on the horizontal axis of the graph and the grain yield on the vertical axis of the graph. If we now turn to the 2014 competition, we think there are high yield, the potential yields were higher in 2014 than 2013, and certainly as we see the results coming in, they look to have been more successful than 2013, which is very encouraging. The yields are all will all be shown on the Yen website, which you can see on the screen there, the address of. What we're trying to do with the yield enhancement network is, as I said earlier, to achieve a much faster rate of increase in yield. The measure of success will be whether we're getting new record yields each year, and whether we can see ultimately the national yield pattern back on track to produce the 11 tonnes that we're going to need by 2030 or 2035.